Thanks very much. It's good to be here with you all. I should have asked beforehand, but Mr. Gray or Kenny, when am I supposed to stop? 8. Okay. Do I leave time for questions?
If you want to.
Okay. Yes, maybe. Do any of you, is anybody going to have any questions? Yeah, all right, I see that hand. I will leave a lot of time for questions. All right, let me ask God's blessing on our time. Father, we commit this time to you. We ask you to be here with us. Give us your Holy Spirit. I pray that you make us wise. I pray that you give us the right balance of fear and trepidation as it applies to this area of courtship and seeking a spouse, but also the right kind of ambition and joy. And we ask for it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I titled this talk, Courtship for Dummies. Apparently, there's a lot of you. One of my favorite quotes from Pastor Wilson is, he said a while ago, I don't know if he wrote this down somewhere, but I've just kept it with me, but he said, with regular dating, you can have 2 idiots, but with courtship, you can have as many as 6. If you don't understand what that means, clearly you need to be here. So let me begin. That's the man, the woman, her mom and dad, his mom and dad. Right? There's your 6. Maybe more, I don't know. I want to begin with a definition, and then I have 12 points, 12 steps for you guys. You've heard of 12-step programs. Here you go. All right, the first is just a definition. A simple, very basic definition is courtship is getting to know someone under the blessing of God and her parents with the goal of marriage. That's what I mean. Okay, so courtship is getting to know someone under the blessing of God with her parents' blessing and permission, looking for a spouse, looking to get married. Just because you court someone doesn't mean that you're going to marry them. It means you're getting to know them to see if you're a good fit, if this is the Lord's will. Just a quick note on the language of courtship. I don't think there's no need to be cranky about specific names, but I would encourage you to lean into calling what we do in this community courtship. And you'll say, well, it'll sound weird. Well, actually, given the world we live in, it's, I think, important for us to actually be signifying regularly that what we're doing is different. And so that would be the reason for arguing for you to pick up that terminology as much as you can. And people say, why you say courtship? You say, well, because what I'm doing, what I'm interested in doing, isn't just dating around, hooking up, etc. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is pursuing a woman. You're interested in being pursued by an honorable man with the purpose of pursuing marriage, starting a family, etc. So I think there's a good reason to lean into that language, embrace that language. Don't be embarrassed by the language. But if one of your friends, gets asked out and says that they're dating somebody, you don't have to pull them aside and do Matthew 18 with them. And if you're courting, you should definitely go on dates, right? So I'm into dating in that sense, but I think there's a reason to embrace the language of courtship. Just don't be cranky about it. Okay, 12 steps to how to not be a dummy when you're courting. Step 1, first rule, don't go shopping if you're not ready to buy. Don't start what you can't finish. Are you ready for marriage? Are you likely to be ready for marriage in the next year or so? You say, well, what do you mean? What does it mean to be ready for marriage? Well, you need to be relatively healthy spiritually, financially, and vocationally. These are the 3 categories. Healthy spiritually, financially, vocationally. First, spiritually. You should have regular Bible reading habits and habits of prayer. You should be a regular church attender and involved in your church. If the girl's father asks you, where do you go to church? You should know, first of all, and your pastor should know that you go there, right? Some bare minimums here. But you should be a Bible reader, a person of prayer. You should be a church attender and involved in your church, and this goes both ways for young men and young ladies, and there should be no backlog of unconfessed sin. Spiritually healthy, spiritually prepared to be married means you're walking in the light, and you know what that means. You're not walking in the dark. You're under a pile of unconfessed sin. The sins you know about, you've confessed, and you're walking in the light. You're walking in the joy of the Lord. And for young men in particular, you're asking a father and a potential spouse, woman, to consider letting you become her spiritual leader. Right? That's what you're asking when you say, "Can I get to know you better? Can I take you out? Can I have your permission to take your daughter out?" You're asking, "Would you please consider me as a potential spiritual leader?" Now, it doesn't mean that you're, a pastor. It doesn't mean that you're that kind of spiritual leader. But the question is do you know what it means to be spiritually healthy? Are you spiritually healthy? Secondly, you need to be financially healthy. Men, you should be paying your own bills, have a relatively organized budget, and if a father asked to see your checking account, you could show him a pattern of faithfulness. Notice that I didn't say, that you have, $100,000 saved up already. Now, some dads may require that, and sorry, I can't help you with that. But bare minimum, if you were going to ask someone out, you would want to be in a place where if they said, "Can I see your books?" It's not, bounce checks and overdue payments and a bunch of charges for because you dropped your balance went below zero. That would not be good. Okay, but paying your bills, supporting yourself, not getting chased by collection agencies, not piles and piles of debt, that would be a bare minimum health financially. You're asking a father, a woman, to consider letting you become her provider. On the flip side, I would say here for young ladies, to be in a position to be asked, you're not in the exact same position, but nevertheless, if you're being considered as a potential wife and helper, you would want your books to be organized too. You would want, even though you're not the one needing to be the provider, you should still want to be someone who knows how to keep books. You want to be someone who could help a man keep a budget, so you should be practicing that now also. Third, vocationally. Are you ready vocationally? Men, you may not have your vocation all figured out yet, but do you have a track record of working hard? Do you have good references from your employers? And are you putting yourself into a position to be able to land the job you're looking for? Is the end of your training in sight? How's college coming? How's job training going? How's your apprenticeship going? Is that coming together? Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've landed the contract that you're going to work for the rest of your life, but is it clear that you know how to? Is it clear that you know how to work, you know how to work hard, your bosses like you, and there's a real good chance that given where you are and the training you're getting, it's coming fairly soon at the very least. Okay, number two. So number one is don't go shopping if you're not ready to buy. Those would be some things to check. Are you spiritually ready to buy? Are you financially and vocationally ready to go shopping? Number two, don't put anything in your Amazon cart you wouldn't want to accidentally buy. Is that clear? What I mean by this is it's kind of like the other one, but I'm specifically thinking of online interaction, texting, and messages. Right? Sometimes people know they aren't ready to court or get married, but they flirt a lot anyway. Sometimes this is in person, but sometimes it's particularly nefarious because it can happen behind the closed doors of texting, messaging, chats, etc. But don't chat electronically in a way that you would never dream of doing in person. Don't chat in such a way that if you did it in person, everyone around you would think you were pairing off. If you wouldn't chat like that at Bootsers, if you wouldn't chat like that in front of everybody, because everyone would start talking, and what are you doing it electronically for? It's the same It's the same thing. So that's what I mean by don't put anything in your Amazon cart you wouldn't want to accidentally buy. Related is just a general warning about gravity. It exists. Just remember that. And what I mean is that God made the world in such a way that when men and women spend a lot of time together, things happen. Right? It does. So be careful about friendships. Be careful about friendships. It's great to have a group of friends, but work very hard to vary it some, because otherwise you can inadvertently create a quadruple date. Right? No, it can be perfectly innocent, There's 4 guys and there's 4 girls, or there's 5 and 4, whatever. It's like, poor guy. But anyways, but my point is that you can have just a group of friends that hang out, and if it's the same people that hang out all the time, there's this thing called gravity. And it just slowly starts pulling people together. And you say, it was completely innocent, nobody asked anybody out, and now we all like someone. Right? I could have told you that, 6 months ago, right? It's this thing called gravity. So yes, have friends of the opposite sex, and hang out. But if you don't be idiots, don't be dummies. Vary it, mix it up some. Make sure that it's not just the same people every single time. 3, don't point your gun at anything you aren't willing to destroy, which is just a good firearms rule in general. But what I want to talk about here is, I actually want to hit 2 things side by side, which is the dangers of courting, sex, marriage, and the glory of it. So guns are awesome. Can I get an amen? No? All right, okay, all right. And so is sex and marriage. But it's also dangerous. It's also dangerous. When I've talked about marriage a number of times, and one of the things I like to point out when I'm talking about marriage is one of the things that you notice as you're reading through the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, is some of the laws surrounding sexual sin and then parent-child relationships can seem to modern sensibilities to just be really, really harsh. I mean, penalties for premarital sex, adultery, homosexuality, or rebellion of children. I mean, penalties in the Old Testament law could be all the way up to death for those sins and crimes. And I haven't done it as much recently, but for a number of years, I would go up to the University of Idaho, usually around this time as the classes are kicking off, and I used to do some open-air preaching and just meeting people and sharing the gospel with them. And one of the most common things that people would bring up is the death penalties in the Old Testament. They would say, I can't believe in a God that would do that. And for a lot of Christians, it's the kind of thing where you say, yeah, I know, it's kind of, well, I don't know. And you try to make excuses or apologize for it because you're a little bit nervous about the whole thing. But rather than being at all embarrassed by the death penalties in the Old Testament, we ought to lean into it and say, you know what? God is God. He knows what he's doing. And if he puts this like big flashing red lights around marriage and says, watch out, watch out, watch out, big flashing red lights and barbed wire fence, and says, if somebody crosses this, you might need to put them to death. That might be the best thing. We ought not to think that God's overreacted. We ought to think God knows what he's doing. He's the one that invented this thing, right? So you think about the guy that says, maybe your neighbor one day is walking in with a big box full of stuff, and you say, hey, what you got there? And he says, a bunch of uranium. And you're like, what are you doing with all that uranium? He says, I'm going to go down to my basement and try to split the atom. And you're like, no, please don't do that. You're kidding, right? That's not really uranium, right? And he's like, yeah, no. I think, he's like hardcore libertarian. I think that we ought to have nukes just like the feds. You say, I like guns too, but no, please. And then he says to you, why do you care what I do in the privacy of my own home? What are you, some kind of pervert? And you say, no. You say, the reason I care about what you're doing in the privacy of your own home is because it's not going to stay there. If it goes right or wrong, we're all dead. We're dead, right? And seriously, that's what happened. That's what happened in our country. We are living in a sexual Chernobyl, right? That's what happened. In the 1950s and 1960s in particular, everybody said, it doesn't matter, have sex however you want, whenever you want. And everybody started playing with uranium. And we're living in the fallout of that with massive incarceration rates, fatherless rates. I mean, why did we legalize abortion in 1973, and why did 65 million babies get murdered? So everybody could have sex. Right? That's what we did. Right? That's the nuclear fallout. Way worse than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Right? So I like to describe marriage then as nuclear. Right? It's nuclear. And if somebody says, what do you do? Oh, I run a nuclear power plant. You say, oh, wow, that must be hard. And he says, no, I just wing it. You say, please don't wing it. Please, I'm begging you, right? So, but at the same time, nuclear power is glorious. It's potent, it's glorious. And so that's what I mean by don't point your gun at anything you aren't willing to destroy. Guns are glorious. Marriage is glorious. The marriage bed is glorious, and it's potent. It's potent. And the central reason why it's potent is because that's where people come from. Right? And that's one of the central things that the whole so-called sexual revolution has tried to deny. They're sort of officially, vaguely agnostic about where children come from. We don't know. It's a mystery. Right? I mean, it's kind of officially where they are, and I don't have time to actually connect the dots, but the fact that the Supreme Court has said that homosexual couples are the same as heterosexual couples is them, in effect, declaring all our marriages gay. Because as far as they're concerned, since Obergefell at least, they're saying, as far as we're concerned, in order to be married, there need not be any possibility of procreation. Right? Because if two dudes have exactly what me and my wife have, then as far as they're concerned officially, procreation has nothing to do with marriage. Right? But that's one of the central lies that we've been fed. Families, marriage, is where people come from. That's where people come from. And they come from marriage biologically, through sexual union, through conception and pregnancy and childbearing. They come, even when children are adopted or brought into homes that way, through foster care. Those are people being nurtured and made into fully mature men and women. I mean, all the way, it's not just, you're not just making the people in the sexual union, but it's in how they're brought up. Whether they're brought up in a loving home, whether they're brought up in a loving marriage, whether they're fed well, whether they're loved well, whether there's laughter, whether there's forgiveness, whether there's teaching and discipline and care, all those things, they all go together. They all blend together to make people. And hopefully many of you grew up in homes where you saw that on display, and you think, man, I can't wait to have a marriage like my parents. Hopefully many of you grew up around dinner tables where it was just a blast, and it's still one of your favorite places to be. But even if you didn't, and maybe you grew up in a harder situation, maybe you can understand from that side how potent it is. Right? So I want to definitely underline, marriage is glorious. It's glorious, and you should want to be married. You should want it, but you also want to be careful. 4, the goal of marriage, I just noted this, is starting a family. The goal of marriage is starting a family. And so I'm taking it as a given that you should not ordinarily enter into a marriage planning to, quote unquote, wait for a while to have kids. This is again one of the central lies that's frequently fed is, well, you can get married and then you can decide down the road. Well, no, I think ordinarily when you get married, you should think to yourself, we get to start a family. That should be the plan. So this means that you should ordinarily plan that if the Lord blesses, you could have a child about 9 months after marriage. So just again, thinking in terms of, am I ready? Am I ready to get married? Well, if that would be if that's an ordinary possibility, the Lord opens and closes the womb, just because you get married doesn't mean you'll have a baby 9 months later. But you need to be thinking, we're going to be actively doing the kind of thing that might get us a child in 9 months. Right? That should be part of the plan. 5, while different families, cultures, and communities may vary to some extent, they do vary to some extent, I would recommend a year-ish as a reasonable amount of time to court, get engaged, and get married. A year-ish. I'm thinking about 6 months to get to know each other well, and about 6 months to plan a wedding, give or take. Right? That's not thus says the Lord at all. But that's generally enough time. Now, this may be extended somewhat if your very first date is literally the first time you met them, but I don't know why you'd do that. But if you did, maybe, so give yourself some more time to get to know them. I'm also thinking about our community in particular, where a lot of you have grown up together, a lot of you are going to school together, a lot of you are going to spend a lot of time together before anyone asks anyone out. And so I'm assuming there's going to be generally a fair bit of knowledge about one another, but where there's less knowledge, then don't rush it. Also, this time frame might be extended if you live on opposite sides of the country, you're far away from one another, it takes longer to see one another. Of course, don't go home and tell your dad, Pastor Toby says you have to get married in a year. No, that's not what I said. But I would say, given our community and the kind of time we spend around one another and the fact that you can drive anywhere and be there in 5 minutes, you're seeing one another a lot more often usually, and I think about a year works. 6, different families may have different expectations for who you need to talk to first, but the biblical principle is that you must honor father and mother, and young ladies are under the protection of their fathers in particular. So my recommendation, and I think the ordinary expectation in our community, is that if you want to ask a young lady out, you should ask her dad first. I recommend asking dad first. Introduce yourself to him. Tell him that you'd like to get to know his daughter better. Can you take her out for coffee sometime? Now, at some point, a father may give permission to his daughter to accept an offer to go on a date without asking first, but maybe he would say, please let me know if you think you're going to go on a second date with him, that kind of thing. And I'm thinking maybe here particularly of older daughters that move out of the house, that sort of thing. I can imagine one of my daughters has finished college and is living on her own. I might at some point say, if a nice man asks you out on a date, if you think it's a good idea, you can accept. But let me know if you think you would go on another one. Let me know. I'd like to meet him. But I would say ordinarily, if we're talking about young ladies that are still under their in the home, or at least pretty closely, directly under their father's protection in that sense, ask dad first. Be direct. Related to this, guys, don't be weenies. This is just a freebie. This isn't even on my list. But it's just an important principle. Don't you agree, ladies? And what I mean by this is there's a temptation for guys to do the friend thing until they're pretty sure that maybe she'll say yes. That's being a weenie. Okay? Don't flirt. I'm pretty sure she smiled in such a way I think she's going to say yes. That's lame. That's really lame. Be a gentleman, be a friend, be an honorable friend, but don't push the limits because you're trying to get a yes before you actually ask. Right? Don't do that. That's being a weenie. Be honorable, and it's the right kind of honorable when even if she did like you, she's still a little bit surprised. Not, I was wondering when you were going to ask. Right? And I know that sometimes happens anyways, but your goal should be to be the kind of honorable friend who's not pushing limits of friendship in order to get that secret yes before the real yes kind of thing. Don't be weenies. All right, where was I? 7. That was completely free. It was not even on the list. 7, remain chaste in every way throughout courtship. Remain chaste in every way, thought, word, and deed. Most serious Christians understand that they must remain sexually pure, but we live in such a sexual sewer that it can become unclear as to where the line is. Basically, anything sexually stimulating belongs in the marriage bed. Anything that would make you jealous for your future husband and wife to do with someone else should be off limits. Do unto others as you have them do to you. You're not married yet, so you don't want to be in a position where you have to, if it doesn't work out, that you have to apologize to someone. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Anything that would make you jealous for your future husband or wife to do with someone else should be off limits. Fathers are ultimately responsible for guarding their daughters in this, but I would urge every young man not to have any physical contact. I'm talking about handing holds. No handing holds. No holding hands, no side hugs, anything, until you're fairly sure this is the woman you're going to marry. Just have that as your standard. Spend the first few months getting to know one another really well without the complications of physical touch. You say complications? Yes, right? It's hard to think clearly when you're like, this is really fun. We're holding hands. Oh my gosh. Right? And you're going to have that moment. And you're like, oh my gosh, we're holding hands. And there's electricity and there's fireworks and dad's going to say, are you theologically compatible? And you're like, yes! We agree on everything. Right? Just get it figured out before you do that. Get it figured out. Right? Make sure you know. And again, the fathers should be guarding this, but men, I would urge you as the ones who need to be leading in this relationship to be thinking to yourself, I'm going to keep that. I'm not going to do that, anything, until I'm pretty sure, at least in my mind, that if God will bless this, I want to marry her. If you know that, then I think you can begin heading down that road with her father's permission. But again, very, very slow. Be careful. 8, this includes remaining chaste spiritually and emotionally. So not just physically and sexually, which of course is important, but you need to remain chaste spiritually and emotionally. Some Christians would never dream of sexual impurity, but they are complete idiots when it comes to undressing themselves spiritually and emotionally. They think it's pious to share their most intimate feelings and thoughts because it was, given in the form of a prayer request. No, it's like just because you said, will you pray for me? And then you just, and just, pulled out your heart and said, will you please hold this for me? And that's, in a strange sort of ways, that's still unchaste. And partially because men and women are different, and women can tend to be willing to do this and think that it doesn't matter, and don't know that in certain ways it doesn't mean the same thing for the man. And I can't really completely explain that to you. But it's just true. And I would just basically, you should be thinking to yourself, think of like a rug, like a long throw rug that you could roll up. Think of different parts of that throw rug as all of the parts of your relationship. So there's like a physical, there's spiritual, emotional, intellectual, whatever, agricultural, I don't know. All the parts of your relationship. I don't even know what that means. But all of the elements of your relationship, you want them to line up. You want them to match. And so as you get to know someone, you are starting to unroll that rug a little bit. You're spending more time together. You're talking about more things together. You will be at a meal together and you'll pray together. And there are things like that. But there's a way to start unrolling that carpet in a really wonky way where one side's rolling way down because you're getting really, really spiritually intimate. And you're sharing all of your thoughts and feelings in a way that's really unchaste. Your most intimate thoughts and feelings are not just for some random guy who asked you out. They're for your husband, right? So this kind of emotional and spiritual intimacy can end up being a weird kind of foreplay. Sometimes couples start struggling with temptations here because they've invited that kind of intimacy. If you don't want to be that close physically, then don't be that close emotionally. Don't be that close in terms of sharing all your thoughts and feelings. 9, spend your courtship with other people or in public. Don't hang out alone all the time. Of course, it's fine to go on a walk, the two of you, or go out to dinner, if parents have given the blessing. Have talks one-on-one, sure. But don't pretend you're married when you're not. Don't spend a whole bunch of time in contexts where the natural place for you to be spending that alone time would ordinarily look like you were married. Lots of time alone in the car together, alone in your apartment, etc. These are recipes for disaster. Don't act like you're at a place in your relationship which isn't true. Anyway, if you really do want to get to know someone, you want to see them interacting with their parents, their siblings, and their best friends. You can't pretend to be someone you're not around those who know you the best. Do you really want to get to know them? Then don't do the one-on-one thing too much. Mostly do hang out with other people. Mostly hang out with family. Mostly hang out with friends. It's the best way to get to know one another. 10, the basic shape of marriage we're given in Scripture is husbands are to love their wives like Christ loved the church, and wives are to respect their husbands and submit to them like the church does to Christ. So this means that the fundamental thing you're trying to figure out is whether you are well equipped to love this woman well, and does your love bless her, and whether you are well equipped to respect this man well, and does your respect bless him. So that's really, those are the fundamental commands that God gives to us in Scripture, husbands and wives. Husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, making her pure and holy, without blemish. Wives, respect your husbands. Submit to your husbands as the church does to Christ. Of course, this will come out in many day-to-day details, how you get together and go out to the park to play volleyball, how you end up going over to your folks' house after the event, how you go, how the walk goes, how the conversations go. Lots of details, but you should be thinking to yourself, what I'm trying out for, or what we're trying out together here, is this goal of me being able to love well and her being able to respect well. So do you love her? Are you able to love her like that? And notice there's don't just think, do I have warm feelings about her? Right? That's not what I mean here. I mean this kind of, are you able to lead her? Are you able to see what she needs, and are you able to bless her? And it's just little ways because, of course, you're not her husband. And so there's all kinds of ways in which it's none of your business, but there's little ways in which you're going to have opportunities to try it. Can you lead her well, and does she like it? And do you like the way he leads? Do you respect it? Do you look up to it? Do you admire it? Those are the questions you want to be asking. Don't forget those central tasks, love and respect. Do you want to lay your life down for her and make her more like Christ? Do you respect him highly? Do you want to follow him? 11, Closely related, while you do not need to have your whole future figured out, some areas of interest should be on the table for discussion, and vocations and callings with particular weight should be addressed. So, for example, are you planning to be a missionary to China? You should probably tell her. Do you want to be a police officer? Do you want to join the military? Do you want to be a doctor? Are you planning to move to Hollywood and make movies? Some of these things, if they're on the table, they should be parts of the conversation. You don't need to have the whole thing figured out. You don't need to necessarily be absolutely committed to it, although if you are absolutely committed to it, again, she ought to know. I've told men who are considering the ministry this before, it's a similar kind of thing. Not every wife is cut out to be a minister's wife. Not every wife is cut out to be a military wife. Not every wife is cut, and whatever else you might be thinking about, that should be, as much as you know, talked about, brought up. Also related to that would be, you also need to talk about, there's a good, you could probably find this in a few different books, but there's a checklist that I think it's Desiring God, called Questions Asked When Preparing for Marriage, that I've printed out and handed to couples before. But it's a great checklist of just asking lots of questions. Ask lots of questions, lots of questions. And as you're getting to know one another, you should both have lots of questions to ask one another. But gents, you in particular, as leaders in the relationship, be thinking in terms of, I want to think of categories. Think of categories of things you want to talk about. The helpful thing about this checklist that the guys at Desiring God put together is that it's like, there's some things about like, what do you think about, health and nutrition? What do you think about, do you buy new or used cars? Are you into shopping thrift stores, or are you into, whatever, Abercrombie and the Gap or whatever? But it's a lot of like just all over the place, but ask those questions. And it's not like you're gonna ask everything. It's not like you're gonna get engaged and then think, oh no, I forgot. I mean, hopefully. But what's your Bible reading like? What's your church background like? How was your family growing up? What's your folks like? What was all those kind of things. You should be asking as much of that as possible as you get to know one another. Lastly, 12, sexual history. You shouldn't bring up your sexual history on the second or third date, but if you have any significant sexual sin in your past or history of porn use, for example, that needs to be disclosed to the father or to the man courting you through your father, if it's on the girl's side, as soon as it looks like this relationship is likely to go somewhere. So this is a do unto others as you would have them do to you. But if there is something that this was something that happened back in the day, and I know it has to be brought up, it's not the first few dates, but if things are looking good and look like they're going to go somewhere, you would want to bring it up sooner than when you ask her to marry you. Yeah, that's bad timing. So with plenty of time, because basically the do unto others as you would have them do to you is, if it's the kind of information that you would want to know going into a marriage, then you want to give them that kind of information at a point in the story where they can do something with it, which would allow them to say, I'd rather not, and they can back out of it freely. And related to this is in courtship, I said this at the beginning, courtship's not pre-engagement. Right? Courtship is getting to know someone, which means that at any point in courtship, you're free to say, thanks so much, no thanks, and walk away. And if you're doing it in an honorable way, if you've been honoring the parents and you've been honoring her and you've been honoring him, and you've been doing unto others as you would have them do to you, there can be some disappointment when it doesn't work out, but you can walk away and there's no guilt, no shame, and it's not terrifying or shameful to see them on the street next week. There can be some disappointment. There can be a little bit of, bummer, it didn't work out. But you know what? When you do it in a God-honoring way, it's the kind of thing where you can walk away from it and be joyful, cheerful, thankful, wish them the best, because you've treated her like a sister, you've treated him like a brother in the Lord, and even if you don't want to be best friends after that, it's not in a place where you've got all kinds of hurt feelings, resentment, and bitterness. So hopefully this has been helpful, and I've left you 10 minutes to ask questions. And we'll just set the stage for the questions as all of these questions you can be asking for a friend. Unless you don't want to, unless you want to be that guy. Yes, sir. Oh. I think the thing, there's one of the good books on courtship, I would say, is Her Hand in Marriage by Pastor Doug Wilson. But one of the things I would say is, again, that would be the kind of thing where, at least early on in the courtship, this would be in the encouragement of don't go too fast, even on the theological or like study side of things too. So you might give each other book recommends. You know, hey, have you read that? Oh, I really liked that. Hey, have you read that? Yeah, what'd you think? I like that one too. Like, that'd be all cool and everything. I would be a little bit riding the brakes on doing an in-depth book study together right off the bat for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. But Her Hand in Marriage would be great. I think Pastor Doug's other family books I'd highly recommend. Reforming Marriage, Federal Husband, Fruit of Her Hands by Mrs. Nancy Wilson. I have a book called No Mere Mortals, which is based on the premarital counseling that I do with couples. But maybe wait for that one until you're actually engaged. I don't know. I mean, I would just say, but those would be some starters. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Well, I'd say the goal there would still be to be as fruitful a mother as you can possibly be. And so for many people who are barren, that would mean adopting. Maybe some it would mean doing foster care. And maybe some are really active in their communities. So in the Bible, Deborah was called a mother in Israel. At the end of Romans, Paul says to at the end he's giving all his thanks to all his friends in Rome, and he says, "Make sure you say hi to Rufus and especially his mother, who has been a mother to me." And so I think all women are called to a ministry of motherhood, a fruitfulness. And that ordinarily looks like bearing biological children. And for some, it would mean being a mother by adoption or foster care, or just how they minister in their community. There's been glorious Sunday school teachers and school teachers who sometimes were women either who had never been married or couldn't have their own children, and they gave themselves away to many children in that way. That help? Okay. Others? Yes, sir. This is the mystery, actually. In Proverbs it says, "The way of a man with a virgin is too wonderful for me. I don't understand it." That's probably another talk. But I think, but I mean, honestly, I would say, Pastor Doug actually has used this. Oh, there's a couple other books. Get the Guy, Get the Gal. I've not read them yet, but those are, I think they've come out in the last year. And he uses a phrase, how to be the guy that the girl you'd want to have. I don't know how it goes. I don't know. It's too complicated for me, but what, you know it? Yeah, it's be the kind of person that the person you would want to marry would want to marry. There you go. Like what she said. But I think that principle is right. So I think you can't guarantee that you're going to be interesting to every young lady, and that's probably best, actually. And vice versa, that you can't guarantee that that you're going to be interested in a gentleman. But I would say what you want to do is you want to be growing in godliness in every facet, and don't just think godliness in terms of making sure you read your Bible and pray. Yes, do those things. That's essential, but also be growing into the kind of man that reflects the image of your Father, the image of God. That's godliness too. And so your vocation, your studies, your hobbies, the things that you're into, pursue those things with all that you are. And I think this goes both ways for guys and gals. You ought to be growing in godliness, meaning you want to reflect your Maker in as much glory as you possibly can. As you possibly can. Be the man who reflects God's glory. Be the woman who reflects God's glory. And then I would also just say, have a great sense of humor. I mean, it really is hilarious. God made men and women, and then he said, watch this. Right? And this is going to be hilarious. Watch this. It's like, angels, come here. Check this out. They're all a bunch of dummies. Watch. You just have to have a great sense of humor. You do. And so, guys, you've got to be strong. You've got to be tough. Women have to be strong and tough too. But you need to just this is why doing hard things as you're growing up is good for you. Failing at hard things is good for you, because part of winning a woman is going to be one of the hardest things you do and one of the most rewarding things. And if you end up like the guy in the picture, then you say, well, I don't know why she wasn't interested in my nuclear physics. Then you need to find a woman that's really into your nuclear physics, right? They're out there. I guarantee you, they're out there. But there's more to say, but that's a good start. Grow into the kind of, you want to be thinking, I want to be radiating the glory of my Father, and trusting God that the way that you grow and you're becoming the man or the woman that God intends for you to be is going to make you the right kind of attractive to the right person. And for other people that aren't interested in that kind of glory, oh well, too bad for them. They're going to find some other glory. Yeah.
I've noticed in kind of her-handed marriage, a lot of the courtship books that are in our community talks on that, kind of assume this relationship with a daughter and her father in a family structure.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's
Yeah.
political for our community. What's the best way to navigate a situation with maybe an absent father or father who
Yeah.
just doesn't play kind of that role?
Yeah. Right. Great question. I'll tell you a story first. This will have to be the last one because this is a good story. All right. When I moved to South Carolina a number of years ago, if my friend from South Carolina happens to watch this, hi. But this fellow, single guy, probably in his upper 20s, really wanted to get married, had read Doug's books. And he went to a different church, but he came and met me and was like, would you please kind of hold me accountable? I want to pursue a woman. I want to get married. And I was like, yes, I'd be glad to do that. And he said, all right, we'll be praying for me. I'm in the hunt, And okay, great. And he comes back to me a couple months later, and he sort of says, man, it's been rough. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, there's this Christian swing dance night. And I went down to Christian swing dance night, met a girl. We hit it off. We had a great night together. At the end of the night, I said, hey, I'd love to get to know you better. And I'd love to meet your dad and just so that, he knows, and can I take you out again sometime? And she looked at him and she said, what, are you some kind of creep? No way. And then just walked out. And he says, I thought we had a great night. She was like creeped out by me asking if I could talk to her dad. And so I brushed it off. A couple weeks later, went back to Christian swing dance night, and apparently that was the place. And he said, met another girl, and we hit it off. It was a great night, had a great time into the night. I said, hey, I'd love to get to know you better. I'd like to take you out sometime, and can I meet your dad and everything? She says, oh, that would be so sweet, of course. And so like the next night or a couple nights later, he goes over to her house to take her out, meets her dad, and says, "Hey, I just wanted to meet you and get to know you because don't want to just date around. I really do want to be careful and honorable, and I'm looking to get married." And he's like, "Get married? You stay away from my daughter, you jerk," and like kicked him out. And he comes back to me like this. He's like, "What am I doing wrong?" And I said, "You know what? Just find a girl and take her out. Do it 2 or 3 times, and then ask if you can meet her family." Third time was a charm. He's been married now for a number of years. First date, by the way, took her out on a hot air balloon ride. So you might want to write that one down, guys. That's also completely free. So long story to your question is, yeah, you got to read your situation. And so there are situations where the dad's not in the picture, or the dad doesn't want to be in the picture, or whatever, and there's difficulties there, or just doesn't understand, or whatever. And I think the principle is that you want to honor her father, you want to honor her parents. In this situation, the dad was never in the picture, and it was a single mom actually in this situation. But he did go home and meet her mom after several dates, and made sure that she was in the picture. But I would say you just want to do everything you can to honor the parents. And so there's not a verse that says you have to ask dad first, then take her to coffee. That's just our way of just showing that honor, and it usually is a good practice. But if it's someone who maybe is not from our community or someone who's didn't grow up in this community, it's not dishonorable to walk up to a girl and say, "Hey, I'd love to get to know you better. Can I take you out, or should I call your dad?" Or that's straight up the middle, and that's honorable. You didn't break any rules by asking her. You didn't know. Should I call your dad, or can I take you out, or how does your family do that? Girls, don't be offended if a guy asks you that question. That's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. You don't need to assume that he had to have known. He might not know how your family does things, and then don't work with one another. But so I would just say honor father and mother as best you can. If there's no parents in the in the picture, I would strongly urge you though to get other men that you trust and respect around you who can give some protection. Maybe a trusted pastor or elder. Maybe sometimes the man's father can kind of help a little bit too, although he's entirely biased. But I would say that's why we're in a church community as well. So you may not have your own father, but maybe you have a pastor or an elder or someone like that who can provide some of that kind of protection and care. So, all right, y'all. Thanks so much.